My name is not Dr. Paula Borowska, as you can guess. Unfortunately, we couldn't find childcare arrangements to take care of the little one, so I will do it for her. So we have just two presentations today in our history panel. The first one will be by Dr. Sándor Földvári, who is not for the first time joining this conference, this time online. And his presentation is titled as follows: How far the Belarusian books got, intercultural context between the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Hungarian Kingdom as reflected in the book Migration. Sándor, I will invite you in a moment. And the second presenter is Vera Haponava, childhood experience in medieval and early modern Belarus through the lens of childhood social theory. I don't know whether it's history properly or not, because social theory doesn't sound to me like history, but probably there was no other more suitable panel, so this is why you ended up here. Sándor, would you like first to say a few words about yourself, and then you'll have 15 minutes to talk about your research.
Okay. It's a great pleasure to present at your conference. Albeit I can't share my screen because here's a message that host disabled participant screen sharing. So my kind request, please give me opportunity for screen sharing, and during
done.
Yes. So now I'm sharing my screen. Thus, dear colleagues, thank you again for being here. My technical question, two technical question. Can you see my share screen? Yes, I can see your screen in London, where I have already been 3 years ago, so you can hear me and you can see me. Thus, my topic is a question that in Habsburg, in the Hungarian Kingdom and in the Habsburg Empire, we have some Slavic peoples inhabited here in this multicultural country, and we have here significant collections of old printed books in Cyrillic letters, because the Slavic peoples inhabited in Hungarian Kingdom, namely the Orthodox Serbs and Orthodox Romanians and Greek Catholic Carpathia Ukrainians, who call themselves Rusyns. They are a very special ethnic group, almost an independent nation, but we can't put into debates about Rusyns. That the fact is that in Hungarian Kingdom there are significant collections of old printed books in Cyrillic letters, because these Slavic peoples who followed the Byzantine Christianity, thus the Orthodoxy and the Greek Catholic confession, had to use liturgical books. Albeit the question is, why Belarusian books put to Hungarian Kingdom such a far distance? And dear colleagues, if you can see my share screen, please let me express my my great respect to my past friend, Professor Dmitry Karev, and please allow me to dedicate my paper to Professor Dmitry Karev, because he was a great builder of the Hungarian and Belarusian cultural and scientific scholarly contacts. And Professor Karev visited Budapest, the capital of Hungary, and he presented papers at the Belarusian conferences in Hungary. As you may know, there was a Professor András Zoltán, who was awarded by the Belarusian state too, who developed the Belarusian philology in Hungary. And then I met Dmitry Karev in Kaunas too. As you may know, there were very, very interesting and nice Belarusian conferences in Lithuania. and I mean that Professor Dmitry Karev was a very significant person in the Belarusian historiography, so my paper is dedicated to him. And as for Grodno, as Karev was a significant person in Grodno, or Hrodna in Belarusian, my abbreviated paper already published in Russian, so those are interested in particular in the book migration and book history may photocopy this screen, and that published paper in Grodno is already accessible in the academia site, albeit at the moment I'm speaking a bit different topic. So this is not an English version of that Russian text. So you can see that, for instance, Supras, which is very significant for the Supras typography of Basilians, and Eger, where we have a significant collection of Cyrillic books of 46 books, are very far. Thus, the question is that how Belarusian books put of such far distance, because the Slavic peoples I have already mentioned imported their books from the Pochayev Lavra in West Ukraine and Ukrainian typographies as the Univ Lavra, and from Kiev already it's far distance. Why Belarusian books? And you can see that Hungary was under the Turkish occupation, and the western part of the Royal Hungary was a province of the Habsburg Empire. Thus, those peoples inhabited Hungary were very poor. How they could purchase these books from such a far distance? Thus, we have only 4 books from Belarusian typographies, albeit there are very, very rare books. Thus, the Apostle, printed by Spiridon Sobolin Kutein in 1632. I know you are familiar with the Halinchenko or Golinchenko bibliography, the Kniga Belarusi. 3 copies in the world, and the 3rd copy held in Hungary at the Debrecen University. And in chronological order, the 4 Gospel and Psalter printed in Yevye or Vilna, because there are debates about there were parallelly books were parallelly printed in Yevye, no, in Lithuania, Vievis and Vilnius, and no copy in Belarus, but in Hungary. Then 2 examples of the Supras Liturgicon, albeit there are a lot of examples in Belarus from the Supras Liturgicon, but it has great significance in cultural aspect. As I have already mentioned, the first books of the Supras Basilian typography was this Liturgicon. And the Psalter printed by the Orthodox Confraternity, the Brotherhood in Mogilev, it is very significant because Mogilev was a very, very significant town in the Belarusian history, albeit less research as Vilno. Maybe you have heard about the monograph of the Ukrainian historian Leonid Timoshenko. There is something in the chat, but I cannot read now in the chat. Okay, so you can go away. Please give me a sign when I have already 5 minutes. This is the Debrecen University, the center of the book research on old printed Cyrillic books. And my master, Esther Oitosi, who published some monographs about Hungarian collection of the old printed books of Cyrillic letters. For instance, the Mariapocs Basilia Monastery. Why it is important? Because the church union which went in Brest in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania went then in the Hungarian kingdom in Uzhhorod, and then the eparchy, Uniat eparchy, thus Byzantine Catholic or Greek Catholic eparchy, was established a century later. And then Mariapocs was a very significant place of Basilians, but in the socialist time as well, the monasteries were ruined by communist comrades, tovarishi, and books were spread that Esther Oitosi reconstructed the ruined old monastery libraries and collected these books to the Debrecen University Library. So you can see the bibliography of Kolinchenko, the Zvodny Catalog, Kniga Belarusi, and you can see that the description of the first book, that Apostol by Sobol. And the cultural significance of Spiridon Sobol is very worthy to deal with, and I have already published a long paper in English lately about Spiridon Sobol, so we have no time here to discuss the Spiridon Sobol significance. So yes, it will be in my published paper. We have not so much time. If I have some question, I come to Spiridon Sobol. But why is this important? Because that book were printed in Kutain, followed the first Apostol printed in Kiev by Sobol, and then Sobol moved to Mogilev, and there were two examples of Apostol printed in Mogilev, the third edition of the Apostol, but no examples in Belarus was held from the Kutain Apostol, as Kireyeva, who was a great researcher of old printed books. As far as I know, Kireyeva is already retired from the National Library of Belarus. I met her there, wrote that only two examples, and lately the example of the Kutaino Apostol were moved from Moscow to Mogilev. Albeit we in Hungary have, this is the Hungarian example, and a short paper of my master Eszter Ojtósi. Have I 3 or 5 minutes?
Almost 5 minutes.
Almost 5 minutes, great. Thus, as I have already mentioned, the second is the Gospel and Psalter from Yevye and Vilno, and it is significant. It is very significant, not only because we have example and no example in Belarus, but we have very, very long marginal inscriptions about the migration of this book to Hungary. And Eszter Ojtósi then published some monograph. Thus, we have two examples of the Supras Liturgicon. The first was described by Eszter Ojtósi, a defected example, but with marginal inscription. And the second was described by me, and I have already presented about the Supras Liturgicon in the National Library of Belarus too, 7 years ago. And this put to Eger, because the Eger Roman Catholic bishop established a very, very huge library. You can see this, and the Greek Catholic seminarist studied there in Eger, and the rich bishop from the Roman Catholic library, rich Roman Catholic bishop in Eger, when established his library, purchased books from the Ukrainian typographies, and this is the answer. And now I am coming to the final step. Thus, we can answer how these Belarusian books put to Hungary. We have archival sources that the bishop in Eger requested books from the Lviv Greek Catholic metropolitan and Pochayev Lavra. And Pochayev Lavra answered to the Eger Roman Catholic bishop and gave price list of books from Pochayev Lavra and price list of the Lviv confraternity parallelly. And this is very important. They gave price list of books in Polish zloty and in Reynis florin, which was a convertible value in the second half of the 18th century in Europe. And this is the documentation that the Pochayev Lavra managed the book trade. Not only of those books were printed on the Pochayev Lavra, but also other books printed in the territory of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And that is very, very logical that Pochayev Lavra forwarded books from the Supras typography, because the Supras typography was of Basilians, and Pochayev Lavra was of Basilians too. But Pochayev Lavra forwarded books from Belarusian typographies too, for instance, from Mogilev. This is the last book the Mogilyev, no, this is the Supras liturgicon, and the Mogilyev Psalter put to Hungary across the book trade and book donation from the Ukrainian brotherhoods, because they knew that these books were of great significance, that the whole territory of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the typographies of Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and typographies on the territory of the crown, thus the Polish crown, were in close contacts, and the book trade were organized, and Belarusian books had such great reputation that those book trader and those donators who provided, for instance, Basilians in Hungarian kingdom by books, they knew that, for instance, books were printed in Vilna or Yevye, and books were printed in Mogilev, and books were printed by Spiridon Sobol, were of great significance on high cultural level, that they forwarded to such a far distance. Thus,
your time is up.
This is the final conclusion, that the final conclusion and the concept of Ricardo Picchio's concept about Slavia Orthodox and Slavia Romana must be reconsidered, because those Orthodox Slavic enclaves were living among the huge sea of the Western Christianity must be considered, because they were in close connection with the Orthodox lands. Thus Slavia Romana and Slavia Orthodoxa were not divided as in Picchio's model, but they were in close contacts. And this is my final hypothesis or theorem. Okay, so thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'm ready to ask any.
Thank you, Sándor. We'll pick questions later after both presentations. Okay. And although you talked about old books, but I think you are quite advanced when it comes to technology, using the QR code, all those links, and also you asked specifically to record your presentation also on your local computer, so it's not just recorded on the cloud, but also on your local computer so that you can use it elsewhere. Well done.
Now I'm doing my PhD in archaeology in the Edinburgh University. I'm highlighting that this is archaeology, not social sciences, not history, not anything else, though I'm apparently drawing from these other disciplines. But what can we do? The world is such that we have to do interdisciplinary studies at the moment. So I'm doing archaeology of Belarus, which is becoming increasingly weird these days, but still possible. That should be enough. Okay, can we open the slides?
Oh, yes. Here, which one?
The one that has Vera, Haponava.
Great.
So, as Yarik
screen as well.
already mentioned, I'm talking about childhood experiences in medieval and early modern Belarus, and this title slide has a picture that was once shown to us at cognitive archaeology course with the question to identify what is going on the image.
Yeah, good.
Sorry, second. Please. There we go.
So I think the most popular answer was that these are some lunatics, but apparently this is a very famous painting by Braga, 16th century, which is showing childhood games, and probably that's the way of portraying children as smaller versions of adults, which makes it very perplexing to the modern eye. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, thank you. So I'm going to talk about the childhood social theory as promised, and then its applications and what was borrowed from it in archaeology. Then I will explain why I'm talking about it and how it is related to my wider PhD research, and then go into the main topic, what I have found so far in the available resources on the topic of childhood experiences in past Belarus, second millennium. And finish off with a few words about diet and winning, because this one part of this experience is that I'm focusing on as the proxy for everything else. Next slide. So, as you know, many of you, I think, the feminist theory has brought about interest in different marginalized minorities, including children. And in the 1980s, as a consequence, social scientists started to be dissatisfied, or at least social scientists in the so-called global north, started to be dissatisfied with how their disciplines dealt with childhood and with the general lack of attention to children. Their main criticism revolved about seeing children as unfinished products or human becomings rather than human beings, and conceptualizing them as passive recipients of social influences. So their main propositions in what was termed as new social studies of childhood were to understand childhood as social construction, which means that it is context-dependent rather than universal phenomenon, and recognize children as having agency, not being only passive recipients of culture and care, but competent human beings. And apparently there were some other propositions like using ethnography as the main methodology, but this is less relevant to archaeology as it deals with dead children. And somewhere around 2010s, the intellectual limits of this new, or the previous turn in thinking, started to be recognized. And I guess it was related to postmodernist ideas kicking in. But the more recent criticism is unsurprisingly termed the new wave. And this time, the central tension in childhood studies was the dissatisfaction with separation of social from biological. So having attracted attention to childhood as a social phenomenon, scientists started to advocate that it is not only social, but it is simultaneously part of culture and nature. And another main criticism was that this initially brilliant idea of childhood agency started to turn into a normative position, which was rooted in middle-class societies, particularly northern ones. And it didn't really fit the wider spectrum of realities. Thus, it led to homogenizing childhoods, which were initially intended to be studied as multiple childhoods. And again, there were multiple other concerns and different propositions to include like disability, queer theory in childhood studies, ontological term, the center childhood, but we do not have really time or space to discuss this, so let's move on. Next slide. You're good. Okay, so what archaeology borrowed? Apparently, archaeology also got interested in children around 1980s and adopted some ideas from the childhood social theory. And the related archaeological studies took the following main themes. First of them, apparently recognizing childhood as a social construct as compared to the physical process of growth. And at least in my mind, the most important implication of that was that the concept of childhood is not universal. And the idea of what a child is different across time, geographies, different cultures, social standing, genders, and many other factors, all of which archaeology is well positioned to explore. Next, the notion, next slide. It was just, an introductory word. The notion of social age, which relates to the norms of appropriate behavior and status, started to be used in contrast to biological or chronological age, which again makes sense because many people in the past were likely not aware of their chronological age, so connected the stages of maturation more with mental and physical capacities. And lastly, children as social actors played active role in social life and economic production. And as we discussed under this new wave, speaking about social aspects, it's important not to overlook the biological ones. For example, the age of puberty and thus physical and sexual maturation changed over centuries, and corporeal characteristics of children, such as their size and physical strength at different times, inevitably affect how they behave or act in the world. So transitional ages, the ones when individuals were perceived to pass from one developmental stage to another, and the factors like gender, social status, and time period, which influence the childhood experiences, is what I will develop further in this presentation, related to the past of Belarus, because they have quite practical applications. Now we can go to the next slide. Thank you. But before that, I like to, speaking about agency of children, mention that the most popular historic narratives in the past of Belarus had as their main characters individuals who were or would be considered as children by modern standards. So in the famous legend of Ragneda and Iziaslav, Ragneda was supposedly about 12 when Vladimir took her, and Iziaslav about 7 when his mother gave him the sword to protect her. And another popular character, Euphrosyna Polotsk, was apparently also 12 when she took the monastic vows and decided to abandon priestly life. Still, when you try to approach the topic, it appears children have not been studied in the past of Belarus almost at all, though they clearly played an important role in the society. Well, I'm going to try to study them a bit. Next slide. But as I mentioned, I'm an archaeologist, not a sociologist or historian, and I'm a particular type of archaeologist who deals with biological materials and biological methods. So in particular, I analyze bone and teeth of archaeological individuals. So I will explain a bit how my wider PhD is connected with what I'm talking about today. Broadly, I plan to look at the experience of children in the 11th to the 18th centuries, and apparently I'm interested in what is going on the territory of Belarus, but given the lack of resources, I often draw information from the wider region. And I personally will use human teeth from several sites in Belarus, from archaeological excavations, to look at the changes in the isotopic profiles in their dentin, so reflecting the early period of their life. Next slide, which will inform us about the time of breastfeeding and weaning and changes in their diet in general. This in turn can be used as proxies to compare with the timing of transitional ages mentioned in the literature and to compare between individuals, for example, those of different sexes, of different social status, time periods, and different sites. So for that reason, I'm looking at all the existing information about transitional ages, treatment of boys and girls in wealthy and poor families, rural and urban sites, and so on. So let's finally look at what the scene is so far. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, it's just introduced in the next section, so let's go to the next one. So speaking about the treatment of children based on their gender, one of the important factors that influences childhood experiences. What we find is that the perceived time of maturation and particular entitlement to marriage differed between boys and girls, usually coming earlier for the girls. Youngest children had certain gender neutrality. For example, they were dressed the same way to some age and were brought up together until the age of 7. With growing up, their path further diverged, with noble boys receiving more substantial education and eventually often going abroad around the age of 14, 16. There are some suggestions that girls were valued less, both in upper and lower classes, and this could find reflection in their treatment and health. Apart from gender, factors like social status affected the burial treatment, the health, and the access to education. Presumably, introduction to adult work happened earlier for children of lower social classes. There are suggestions that the perceived length of childhood may have differed in urban and rural environment, but they are arguable. What is more realistic is that the living experiences of children differed by site, given its unique economic situation and historic path. For example, the burials in Hory Velikia have way more indicators of stress compared to the contemporaneous towns in the GDL, which is probably related to the very difficult historic path of the site. Well, we have, as I mentioned, some written sources regarding the upbringing of nobility children in the 16th, 17th century, but the truth is apparently that majority of the children did not look like this and did not dress like this and were never mentioned in any historical sources. And one of the perks of archaeology is that it allows to look at the lives of such children as well. Next one. So to look for transitional ages in the time or in the period of ancient Rus, we thankfully have grave goods in the burials. And at least one researcher called Vika Makolskaya thankfully reviewed them in the territory of Belarus. So she proposed ages of 2/3, 7, 12, and 14/15 as potentially representing certain socially meaningful borders. For example, in terms of grave goods, between ages 7 and 12, children start to receive their own ornaments instead of those remade from adult ones. And some similarities and differences can be found in the studies of the sites in the wider region, like Russian and Polish sources. There are interesting connotations with Slavonic first haircut right, which by most mentions in the literature occurs around the age of 7 and marks the transition of a boy from mother's to father's care. And from the 14th century, unfortunately, grave goods disappear from burials. And eventually in the 16th century, we have more abundant written sources, though apparently they eliminate the children upbringing of the upper nobility classes of the GDL. The age of 7 still continued to have some significance, marked by start of gendered education in the upper classes. And the last transitional age, especially for girls, seems to be more connected with the event of marriage than with any specific chronological age. And it is very variable even within 1 century, like in 3 consecutive statutes of the GDL within the 16th century. The marriage age changed from 15 and 18 years for girls and boys, respectively, to 15 years for both genders in the second statute, and eventually 13 years for girls and 18 years for boys. So in general, I have to conclude that overall, we have just scraps of information here and there, completely insufficient to draw any more precise picture. And especially 14th, 16th century is just one big gap for me at the moment. And supposed abundance of written sources has so far not produced an equal increase in the studies of children in them yet. And as discussed before, the biological aspects should be not overlooked. And in this regard, the age of 3, 7, and 12 that come up as socially significant in the past of Belarus seem to align well with the categories of children development proposed by Fallender, though these categories still lean a bit more to social, but I will maybe include some discussion of more biological data like growth spurts later on in my study. Let's go to the next one. So as far as attitudes to children are concerned, I have to conclude that evidence about them is quite ambivalent. Many researchers point out the problem of the general underrepresentation of children in the cemeteries of 10th, 12th centuries in ancient Rus. This may be due to taphonomy or disposal of unwanted children somewhere else apart from the cemeteries. But the idea of that a different burial rite was practiced for children is quite popular, which could reflect a different attitude to children, such as not considering them fully fledged members of the community. I will be quick. In written sources like letters, we have some expressions of affection towards children, and with time, institutionalized forms of care appeared in the GDL. And at the same time, corporal punishments were practiced, and osteologists report cases of child abuse, neglect, and infanticide of unwanted children are also tested. So the last thing, as I mentioned, I will say a few words about, you can change the slide here. Diet and weaning, as this is the proxy that I intend to mainly use for studying broader changes in childhood experiences. And in short, there are no studies related to this topic in Belarus, to the best of my knowledge. And I thus can only mention some indirect evidence on the topic, such as ethnographic and demographic accounts, and weaning and diet studies from neighboring countries. The general high mortality of children in the past is also tested in Belarus, as well as stunting of growth is observed in skeletons from graveyards in the wider region, which might be due to subnormal nutrition due to widespread poverty, famines, and wars, which are widely attested in the written sources of the region. And you can see the speculations of possible weaning foods, all potentially harmful to infant health. But this again comes from Western medieval cookbooks and from ethnographic studies. And the only mention of weaning time in Belarus that I have found so far was based on frequencies of such stress indicator as Kribra orbitalia, and again ethnographic records, which is not much. So this is all I wanted to show you so far. You can go to the last slides, which says something like, thank you. No, it doesn't, but anyway. Last point I want to make is if there are any historians in the audience who have any ideas where I can find more sources on this topic, I will very much welcome your inputs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vera. And I think this makes this conference fascinating. Like you can learn about so many different aspects of Belarusian studies, from political science to sociology to archaeology. And I wonder how practically difficult it is to do archaeology of Belarus from Edinburgh. Do you need to smuggle teeth of babies into, Edinburgh
It's
airport?
not smuggle. It's all legitimate. So see, in fact, for other archaeologists, it is practically impossible. Within Belarus, if you are fired or suspected to be not loyal, the only institution that provides you rights to act as an archaeologist is the Academy of Sciences. So there is a complete monopoly on this profession, and if it doesn't give you the right to do your profession, then you are out of archaeology. If you have to go out of the country, for example, colleagues who escaped to Poland, again, you have to look at the wider region probably, and you can't attend the excavation, you can't get to your artifacts, you're again out of Belarusian studies. I'm a bioarchaeologist, which is very lucky, because if I have a bag of teeth, I can do so many different things with them that practically I can be occupied for years. And yes, it has become more difficult because some colleagues could not continue to work with me from Belarus, but others agreed to do it unofficially, or still Academy of Sciences somehow agreed to sign a new memorandum of understanding last year with me. So yes, there are some more weird ways where someone is sending samples to the academy from a different university, and then the academy is giving samples to someone else who brings them to Poland, and then we bring them somewhere else. But it is still possible.
Yeah, well, I can't think of a less political topic than studying teeth of kids who died like 1400 years ago. But even that can be political, right? In Belarus.
Well, I think, when they, for instance, refused to publish my only article that I proposed to them several years ago before anything happened in 2020, as in me being extremist, it is very hard to find any relation of this to any kind of scientific work. And the same way, some archaeologists like Viktor Cherokov was fired for pretty much having reposted something from Radio Svoboda, which was an article about some archaeological finds dated like 10 years back. So yes, all of these connections are very weird. And when Academy signed the memorandum with me, they said, it will be fine if there is nothing political in it. And apparently there is nothing political in it. And they signed it. So very variable.
Yeah, I see. Thank you. Do we have questions for Sándor or for Vera, either here in the room or in the online audience? Those who are interested in books will have opportunities to see really old books tomorrow when we will be visiting the library. I appreciate that people are tired at the end of the day, and
I have a question for Vera behind you.
okay. All right.
So, this comes with a small anecdote. My father, who passed away in 2019, was a dentist, and I received this sort of heavy metal box last year when I was in France from my stepmom, and it turned out to be a container full of my teeth. That's from when I was a child. My father was a dentist, and my stepmom was like, what do I do with this? And so now I went through the airport in France with a big box of someone's teeth. They were like, what is this? And I had to explain. Anyway, so I now have a box full of teeth. So I don't know what to do with them. Maybe there's some use for them. Anyways, but having had a father who held on to my childhood teeth, my assumption is that, isn't there sort of the dental college at Edinburgh is quite famous, as far as I understand. So wouldn't they have a lot of, I assume there's sort of dental archaeologists and things. My guess is that you could talk to them about their methods of analyzing teeth and things like this. This is coming from a very ignorant place after handling a box full of teeth.
No. It's brilliant that you have a box full of teeth, and certainly you can do many interesting things with them, and without having to destroy archaeological teeth, which is a very bad thing because they're always unique. You can't excavate the same thing twice. You always destroy what you do in archaeology. So many master students practice on their like pieces of hair, pieces of nails.
But I'm special because I have a box of teeth.
Because yes, you can't really make master students take out their teeth. So yeah, but if they have, it would be very interesting for them.
But in terms of for Belarus, yeah.
Yes, I know that some archaeologists who now develop the methods, the very elaborate new methods that we are trying to apply to this analysis, come from dental background. And this is very helpful and useful because I, dealing with these teeth, have some questions that I can't really find any answers to in books. And now I'm looking for dentists to sort of enlighten me on some topics. I'm not sure there are dental archaeologists, but there are osteoarchaeologists who deal with any skeletal material in general, be it bone or teeth, like including myself, but the backgrounds from which they come are different. And I guess having any anatomical or dental background does help, but you don't have to have it to be in this field.
Okay. Yep.
How about DNA studies?
Well, apparently any kind of chemical biological background might be still helpful, but again, you don't have to do it. I mean, for my teeth, I sample them for DNA studies, just following someone else's protocol, just for putting it aside to have samples suitable for aDNA, because this is way more elaborate procedure than sampling for anything else due to high contamination possibilities. Isotopic studies that I do, thankfully, are simpler in this respect. You can't really contaminate much there.
If
there is Paul shaking his hands like.
Okay. So this is also for Vera. So that's a fascinating talk, really interesting to me. But I'm also very ignorant of the topic. You know, my knowledge of teeth boils down to the fact I have a mouth full of them. So I understand that you can learn a lot from looking at these teeth in terms of when someone matured, and you talked about when breastfeeding stopped and such forth. Given you're using these teeth, so I can about diet and such forth, and I understand how you can within a given polity that might tell you something about, because you'd have a community that might be different to a neighbouring polity. Given historically how the borders have changed, have moved in that region, I just wondered why you're using teeth from Belarusian territory rather than from Poland or Lithuania, today's Poland or Lithuania, and what difference that makes.
So the main answer I would say is that I do it on principle, just because you see these methods, and in general bioarchaeology as a discipline, do not exist in Belarus so much. There is very little application of them. So apart from me as a Belarusian bioarchaeologist, even though I'm outside, I don't know anyone else doing it there. While in Lithuania and Poland, there are some people who publish on this topic and who use their materials to do it. So what difference does it make? You know, on the one hand, you can speak about very large scale, like regional, world scale, or at least like micro-regional scale, GDL, Polish, Lithuanian Commonwealth. Or you can speak on a very minor scale, like reconstructing life course of a single individual, or at least of one site. And these are all considered to be legitimate and fairly interesting approaches. So I use Belarusian sites, and for me, and I think for many archaeologists as well, each of these sites will be unique. So if you look at a specific site versus another one, there will be similarities and differences between them, as well as there will be similarities and differences between regions or nations or anything like that. So it's just a matter of scale that you're looking at, and the fact that I decided to try to do it with specifically Belarusian materials and sites is because no one else is doing it with their collections, and they do have something to work on.